So we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to, I think this is the largest class I have ever taught. So we're breaking records in here. This is very exciting, coming off of a quarter that was the smallest class I'd ever taught, as the one person who I think was in that class can attest to. So I cannot wait to start this because I have only ever taught this course as a semester course. So we have a lot of today is going to be focused on what you can expect over the course of this two-course sequence. I know that there are probably a few of you who are just aiming to take the first course. I would like as many people as possible to get through the two-course sequence. I guess just so that I am aware of it, what percentage of people are planning to just take this and not the follow-up course? So a few people. Basically, the two quarters are being broken down into the learning quarter and the application quarter. So unfortunately, this is the wrong single course to take. Not that you can take the other one before this, but it's not going to be quite as fun. And for those of you who are thinking you might not take the second course, I'm going to leave you hanging with here are all of these cool tools and just like that. So let's actually take a look at what this is going to look like over the course of this two-quarter sequence. So in every class I teach, I like there to be application. Those of you who have had me for some course or another know that I'm a little bit obsessed with, if I'm going to teach you something, then you need to apply it. There will be aspects of that in this class, but the main focus of digital game production is mostly put off. You're going to be doing a lot of the learning for how to do that this quarter, and you will be actually doing it in groups next quarter. In the meantime, we're going to be focused on a lot of the preliminary, how do we understand how to analyze games? We need to be able to understand games if we want to be able to make them ourselves. So let's take a look at the exact course design. Most of you know where my office is. If you don't, it's right upstairs. 334 is just up the stairs that are right here and then around the corner. If you don't know where it is, I can show you after class. My office hours are going to be the 2 hours before this class every day. I teach at 9 and I teach at 12. And I don't anticipate having a ton to do in between those two classes. So I'm going to designate them as on-demand office hours. I also anticipate being around from 1 to 3 most days. There are some things that get scheduled in there. So if my door is open, feel free to come bug me. If not, then I may or may not be coming back at that point. If I'm not there between 10 and 12, I'll be back in very quick. Okay, course description, course outcomes, you can read those on your own. Most important thing I'll say all day, textbook, required, get it now. The reason is, and this edition is very important, yes, Shane is holding it up, that is the exact book. And that is what it looks like. It says 4th edition right across the top in text I can barely read from here. Yeah.
It's on Amazon.
Yeah, it's not an expensive book, but there'll be weekly assignments. It's basically a follow along tutorial for learning Unity. And it's something that I could do painstaking in class in a lab-based environment. But I find that if I do something like this, I'm moving too quickly for half the class and too slowly for half the class, and everybody's upset. Yeah.
Is Amazon our best bet to get the book?
Probably. If you don't tell me about it, I'm sure you can find it somewhere for less than that.
Here's Matt. If you actually want to buy the books might have as well.
Yeah, all around, it's not a particularly expensive
Mine was just
book.
on sale.
Yeah. So this book is very important. On Sunday night, the first assignment will be due out of this. So even if you have to do something in the short term to get a hold of something so you can complete that, that's okay. If there are some delays in getting that, talk to me, we'll figure it out. We'll get you caught back up. It's not a huge concern, but please, at some point today, make sure that if you're aiming for a physical copy, it is ordered. So I am offloading all of the Learning Unity to homework. The reason I can do this book is that good. It is basically a walkthrough tutorial of setting up. Here's how all of this works. You will be making some small toy games as part of this. It's broken down into 24 chapters. It says learn it in 24 hours. My experience is those chapters don't take an hour. They take 2 to 3. I'll be assigning 3 of them per week for about the first 8 weeks of this course. We'll be getting through this entire book in this quarter. And you'll just be doing 3 chapters on a weekly basis. And the assignment for this is going to be, you're going to write up your experience. You're going to tell me what you did, what you learned, include some screenshots of what you've produced, and just talk me through your experience. This also helps me to get to know your own experience with Unity. If you say, I've done this before, that is something that is very useful for me to know. If you say, I didn't know this particular aspect, it helps me to be able to, in the future, be able to come back to this type of course and explain things a bit differently for particular topics, or maybe structure a lab around something that everyone was struggling with. I have not historically had that issue, so I feel okay at least transitioning that into that being the homework. It's kind of like going off and following a series of YouTube tutorials on your own, except that we'll all be getting the same experience. And my experience is this is very doable outside of class. What that means for in class is we can do way more exciting things. So we are going to be learning about games from a bunch of different perspectives. We're going to be learning about the psychology behind why are games fun to different people. We're going to be learning about the economic systems behind how game economies work and how they mirror real life economies. We're going to be learning about how to structure intelligent agents. Even if you haven't taken an AI or machine learning course, by the end of this 2-quarter sequence, you should be able to write your own game AI. We're going to be looking at the math behind game balance in a significant level of detail so that maybe you've produced something that you're very proud of. How do you know that it is balanced? We'll be looking at all of that with hands-on examples. I have structured something like 8-ish for this first quarter in-class activities that will have you paired up or in groups or doing some kind of design exercise where we're actually going to be playing games, play testing things. There is a quarter-long project for this quarter where I will initially give you a completely imbalanced trading card game. And your task for the quarter is to learn as much as you can about it, balance it, make it fun to play. So lots of in-class activities that are not just watch me move the mouse, do what I do, look, we did a thing. You can all do that on your own time. I don't want to piss everyone off by doing it at the inappropriate speed. There's no way to do that right. For those of you who haven't had me before, I promise email responses within 24 weekday hours. That means 24 hours of some weekday. If you email me in the middle of the afternoon on Friday, I may not be able to get back to you until some point reasonably early on Monday. That is a guarantee. If I don't do that, what it tells you is that email slips through the cracks and either I forgot about it, I didn't see it in the first place, but 24 hours after you send it, please send me a reminder. And that will hop to the front of my to-do list and make sure that I get a response to you as soon as I possibly can. I don't try to miss those emails, but they're emails. They're a little slippery. Inclement weather. We are a synchronous in-person class, but I do both record and post all of my lectures. So in Canvas, I can show that in the modules section, There is a course resources that have both the Zoom link. If you are unable to make it to class for some reason, you are welcome to join remotely. I don't want to normalize this, especially for this class, because there will be so many in-person activities that you will not be able to do if you are not here. I'll try to advertise those in advance, but that may not always be possible based on the pace of the course. So please, if at all possible, try to be here. If something does happen though, and I am spending a significant portion of the day lecturing, then you can join remotely or watch that back through on the YouTube channel linked here. This also has all of my other courses on it. If you're curious to just go through and virtually take any of the other classes that I've taught. Back to the syllabus. So the reason this says 474 is it is getting a permanent number starting next year. That's not happening yet. You're taking 439. 439 is just the number for all courses that are topics courses. Everything that is taught the very first time has to be a topics course. So throughout the course, you will see 474 and next quarter 475 all over assignments, all over slides. It just refers to this class, the permanent number this class will eventually have. All right, what's next? Textbook. Textbook was required, inclement weather. We will default to holding a remote class. So if the school closes, anticipate that there will be some kind of synchronous remote lecture, something happening that is not a waste of people's time. I will do my best to record those as well. So if power is out wherever you are, don't feel horribly bad about, oh no, I can't get it working, I'm going to miss something. If it is held and I don't actually cancel class, then there will be a recording of whatever it is that we discuss and do. The other things, grading policy, kind of important. So the homework that I mentioned about learning Unity and writing that up, that is 40% of this class. It's a little on the heavy side, but I want to make sure that people are actively participating in and prioritizing the learning of Unity. The reason is that the outcomes of the games that you will make next quarter depend heavily on your understanding of this material. And since it's not happening directly in class, I need to make sure that there is a grade priority associated with that learning. So it is very important that we do it. Next quarter will be very important. Those of you who are not planning to take that are probably rolling your eyes now. But that is the price we pay for having a 2-course sequence. There will be about 4 or so exams. I really bounced between calling them quizzes and calling them exams because those of you who have had my classes before know that I am not a fan of regurgitation style questions, definitional style questions. I like you to apply what you have learned. So I anticipate the exams for this will utilize some kind of example. Like describe a game that has this particular kind of imbalance. What about it is imbalanced? And having you to create a lot of that. I like to give you the freedom whenever I can to come up with your own examples that validate a particular methodology, something that we've gone over in class to show that you understand what it is and can apply it to something that you generate yourself. So something similar to that, that will reiterate a lot of what we cover in this class. Next quarter, we won't have as much of that. There will also be a final paper. I talked about this trading card game that we're going to be balancing throughout the quarter. There are something like 6 different in-class activities that I have planned over the course of this. This final paper will just write up your experience with this whole process. So you will critically analyze everything that you have done and be able to talk about the improvements that you made and the evidence that you have to support that what the changes you made to the game were improvements. Something like that. I don't have this fully written up yet, knowing exactly what this paper is going to look like, but it will be an analytical paper on your experience balancing a card game. I do this in all my classes now. Minimum assignment grade and minimum exam grade for the class of about 60%. And I do this just to avoid any use of AI generation. The idea is if you do your own homework, you should be able to apply it at least a passing level. That should not hopefully be particularly scary. I will curve your own scores if you're borderline and I see your engagement in the class. So again, goal here is not to scare you. The goal here is just to make sure that we're prioritizing, not circumventing the learning outcomes and doing our own work. And that way I don't have to be, basically the worst case from my perspective would be to assume that someone had used AI or cheated when they had not. I see horror stories about that. That makes me feel bad. I don't want to do that to you. What else? You can read most of this. Weekly due dates. I try to keep the same weekly due dates in all of my classes. So written assignments are going to be due Sunday nights. That's just the making sure that you've gone through the Unity associated textbook chapters. The grades for this will just be, did you do what the book asked you to do? Do you have evidence of doing that? You can attach some screenshots. I can pretty easily tell if these learning outcomes were auto-generated or if they're real personal learning outcomes that are personal to your own experience. I want to learn who you are through the scope of all of these assignments. University policies, true across everything. I try to keep a course schedule that I will stick to. As this is the first time I've taught this on the quarter system, I honestly have no idea the extent to which I'm going to be able to stick to this course schedule. But I would like to do my best to do so. So beginning, we're going to look at historically, how have games been analyzed? What layers are there to games so that we can break apart and have an intellectual discussion about components of games? From there, we'll move on to actually working on prototyping games. How do you test games? And then we're going to dive into probably close to the rest of the class being on game balance. And game balance can mean a ton of different things. So we're going to be looking at systems analysis, progression curves, anchors, economic systems, trading systems, basically everything that could be a component of a game, and try to analyze and understand what is the place for this system. How do we introduce such a system in a way that is balanced and fun and fair? We'll define all of that as we go do it, and supplementing all of this will be in-class exercises where you will actually be doing what we are talking about, not just lecturing about it. I want you to be actually playing the games and feeling what it is that we're talking about, getting a sense of what that looks like in gameplay. Questions or concerns about the course or the course structure for at least this first quarter? To give you the sneak preview of the second quarter, the entirety of the second quarter is the application. You will be making 2 different games in the second quarter. You'll be doing so in groups following a software engineering style. So that's why software engineering was the prerequisite to this course. For the second part of this course, you will be absolutely needing to know how to have an associated workflow that uses Git, uses Git flow, writing tests, making sure that everything is working the way that you anticipate, and being able to pull your own weight. Because groups will be smaller than they are in software engineering, there's nowhere to hide in this one. But that will be the big celebratory. I'm anticipating next quarter to be a ton of fun. At the end of each game's production, we're going to emulate releasing those games into the wild. And what that means is you will publish it to be reviewed by other people in the class. Your game is going to get between 11 and 13, I think, reviews. They're going to come from anonymous people in the class. I don't grade the games. I am just as biased as any other person. I want there to be a reasonable sample size. Just because I personally hate platformers doesn't mean that your excellent platformer deserves to be shat on. Just because I love incremental games does not mean that if you produce a shoddy incremental game, I'm going to be very happy and you get a great grade just because of the genre of game that you chose. So it's going to be based on the scores that other people in the class assign based on the reviews that they write. Now, I will be grading the reviews looking for anything technical. I want the reviews to be technical reviews. I want them to harken back to everything we cover in this quarter to be able to critically analyze the game that you played and why it was fun or why it was not. So I will be grading that to ensure that the reviews themselves are quality, but the actual score that gets assigned, I will have no control over. I will be looking for anything that is unfair associated with those scores, though, and correcting on an as-needed basis. But I want it to emulate releasing a game out into the world. Do you know the people who are going to be playing your game? No. They're still going to have an opinion on it. So then we're going to, at the end of that period, we're going to have a party in one of these labs on some afternoon, and we're going to invite any other student in the department who wants to come play your games to come play your games. Any professors who want to see what fun stuff we've been doing. And behind the scenes, I'm working on getting some people from industry in to also give you feedback on your games. So someone who's out there making games right now could play your game and give you feedback. So all of that is coming in the second part of the course, but we have to get there first. Questions about the overall scope of the course or what we're trying to do here? All right, it's pretty straightforward. I'm hoping that in general, this is an easier course than the required courses that I teach. I'm getting a little bit of a reputation as a hard professor, and I'm hoping that this does a little bit to ease that a little bit. I'm not anticipating it being quite as stressful as a lot of the required courses that I teach. All right, let's dive into it. Because this is very much like a software engineering style of course, there's not really a ton of room for hiding or not pulling your weight. So because of this, I really want people to take the learning part of this very seriously. This is going to be how you contribute to the project. That is next quarter's projects. Whenever I do this, though, I don't really prescribe what it is that you're going to make. I'm not going to tell you what game to make. You will have complete, total freedom, both in the balance of the trading card game this quarter, as well as any digital game that you make next quarter. Complete and total freedom. Maybe I'll say one of these games should be 2D, one of these games should be 3D. But other than that, the genre is up to you, the mechanics are up to you. Everything that you can do within the time constraints that you have, I'm not going to prescribe. I want this to be your creative freedom. Games is really the most artistic application of computer science in that you can really do whatever you want with it. As you get the book, you're also going to want to get Unity downloaded and working. There are going to be issues. You're going to have some issues as you start trying to make this work. Don't wait until this weekend. If you end up with questions, make sure that you run into those issues and talk to me ahead of that. We already talked about getting the book ASAP. Chapters 1 through 3 of that are due Sunday night. And as I just mentioned, not going to be super successful at the projects if you don't give it your all to learn that this quarter. And that is the downside to not doing it in class, is I can't force it to happen. It's happening outside of class, and I don't want to force it to happen. I don't think I should need to force it to happen, but I just want to make sure that I reiterate that. All right, enough of that. Let's start having some more fun. So, a question?
We get like a student version of Unity, or is it like?
The free version will be perfectly fine for everything that we do within the scope of the class. We don't get a professional version of it, but really the only value that a professional version will get you is once you've monetized a game, and we're not planning to do any monetization in here. So we should be able to do everything we need to.
Okay, and then would it be as easy as just Googling it, like download Unity?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, download Unity, but make sure that you can launch it, make sure that you can start making something. I don't care what it is, just make a wall or just do something really simple with it so that when you go to plug and play, make sure the version of Unity you download though is the version the book is referring to, which is going to be a good bit outdated. So versioning is really important. We actually want to make sure that we are all using the same version of Unity within here. Because as soon as you start developing something together, if you're using different versions of Unity, that's going to be a massive headache when something doesn't work the way that it worked on my machine. So yeah, we're going to download and use the version of Unity that the book prescribes.
You know that version.
Don't know it off the top of my head.
Could you possibly make an announcement later?
Yeah, I will certainly make an announcement, and even Shane can go find it because I see him has the book open.
It says 2020.
It's a bit outdated at this point. But that said, I think it will make the headaches a little bit less. If you use the most recent version of Unity, there are going to be some aspects that the book says it's not quite the way that I'm actually really hoping they print a 5th edition of this very soon. I remember right when that 4th edition came out, I was still using the 3rd edition in a course that I taught, and there were significant problems trying to get everything to work because the 3rd edition was not referring to the way that it was currently done. So because of that, I think it is important that we all use the exact version of Unity that the book is based on. Their question?
Oh, that's okay.
Okay. All right, well, let's start thinking about defining a game. This is one of the most challenging definitional problems I throw out in any of my classes because it's such a broad idea. But try to encompass everything that a game is. Note that this is not a video game. This is not a card game. This is not what is a game? Abstracting from the concept of a video game. How could you come up with some wording that encompasses all of what that is? It's a huge challenge. There's a lot of bickering about it in the games industry. You gonna stab? Yeah.
That's right. Set of rules that facilitate the play. Is that too big?
Set of rules that facilitate play. Interesting. What do we mean by play?
It's letting someone do something. It's very.
Yeah, it gets challenging, doesn't it?
I guess to sort of help them out, if we're gonna go with play is to be able to interact with the game's rules in order to entertain.
Okay.
A game's form of entertainment, without getting too much in the metaphysics of what entertainment is.
Yeah. Do all games have to be for entertainment? Are there games for productivity? Are there games for learning typing? Or for maybe it makes it more fun and engaging to do, but does it have to be the prescribed outcome of is entertainment the end goal?
I would say like a game is a system or like a collection of systems that are interactable, usually with like a goal or end goal that a user or multiple users can take advantage of.
Okay. I like it. They're very different ways of describing the same kind of thing, yeah.
Environment that a player can interact with, typically with an objective in mind.
Okay, bringing in the concept of an objective, I like it. Yeah, games are played with objectives, right? There's usually a way to win or to progress. If you cannot win, you can at least, by some metric, you can make progress. Any thoughts hearing all of these? What conclusions could we draw?
Interactions, including.
What, interactions?
Seems like the main makeup of the game is interactability matched with a goal.
Okay. Interacting with rules, interacting with potentially other people, other game objects. So there's some kind of interaction, a back and forth that happens with some goal in mind. Interesting. So I'm going to go through a few stabs at this definition. And these are all coming from people in industry. I love this definition. A voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. It doesn't really describe what a game is, but it kind of perfectly captures it. But I don't know, what do we think? Strengths and weaknesses of this definition? Yeah?
It is very abstract and broad and thus vague.
Yes. Are there any examples that adhere to this definition that you wouldn't call a game?
NHS.
Maybe like sports, like fitness, for example.
Okay.
So,
If it's your job to play a game, then it's, I guess, a kind of voluntary in that you could do something else.
but is it unnecessary if it's being treated? Exactly.
That is true.
Then we get into the terms of unnecessary.
Yeah.
Filing taxes.
Filing taxes.
I'm not getting paid enough for this.
That's not voluntary.
It's definitely a game from everyone's perspective, but ours.
The guessing game.
Bernard Suits' longer definition: to attempt to achieve a specific state of affairs using only means permitted by rules, where the rules prohibit use of more efficient in favor of less efficient means, and where the rules are accepted just because they make possible such activity. It's an old one. 1978. I feel like things have evolved a little bit from here, probably, but as an intriguing place to start. Any Civilization players in here?
Yeah.
Sid Meier's definition: game is a series of interesting decisions.
It's a good game.
It's only there that you don't know why, Dave.
There's a lot of bad games that don't.
Strengths and weaknesses of this? It's certainly vague, but in what ways?
Oh, very interesting fine thoughts.
Yeah.
Platformers are more, don't seem to have a lot of decisions, for example.
Jump or not jump?
Don't or fall.
Land on the platform or not land on the platform? Sometimes you don't want to land on the platform. Yeah.
Everybody has a different definition of interest.
This, I like that. I like that approach a lot, is what is interesting to one person may not be interesting to another. But then maybe are games designed for certain subsets of the population for whom that might be considered to be interesting?
I mean, like, developing a game, like designing one, would be a series of interesting decisions. Therefore, is game design a game?
I like to think of it that way. I actually like to think of it that way.
Counterpoint, Candyland exists.
The game that plays itself, Progress Quest, exists. I don't know if any of you are old enough or have ever played Progress Quest, but it was one of the original incrementals from a very long time ago. You launch it, and some people have had it running for, I think, 20 plus years now. There's no interaction whatsoever. It's just straight progression that happens offline. You have no agency in it whatsoever. Is that still a game? You're not, you made the decision to launch the application, but that's about where the decision stopped. Interesting. So we've talked a little bit about what is meant by an interesting decision. It's a decision that doesn't make itself, right? You can't, it's a decision because there is a branching path of some kind. What makes it an interesting decision? Well, if it's not one obvious right path and wrong path, maybe there are some conditionals to when you would choose to do one path versus another. Anyone want to add to that?
Help publish Sid Meier's to give an example.
Yeah.
Just to help add a bit of visualization. In Civ 6, next now you can enter in a dark age, normal or golden age, but there's a heroic age. You might want to abandon trying to get a normal age because the conditions are right. And so you can sort of tank that crappier time in the game to get a heroic age and get massive boosts later on.
Yeah, depending on where you are, how you reach whatever your immediate goals are might change. And where that goal is will shift based on where you are and your understanding of what is to come. I like it. So player needs to have multiple valid options from which to choose. That seems to be the first really important part of an interesting decision. Options have positive and negative potential consequences. There might be something that goes wrong if you make the choice. The outcome is predictable but not guaranteed. What does this mean?
You have some idea of what can happen, but it doesn't mean it necessarily will.
Yeah, you get a sense of this is probably a better choice than that. But if you knew that to be sure, the choice wouldn't exist. The choice exists insofar as your ability to understand what is likely to happen afterwards, but it's not prescribed to happen exactly that way. There are some additional variables, some of which you may have some agency over and some that you might not have agency over. If it's a die roll, for instance, then maybe in 4 out of 6 possible places the die could land, it's a positive outcome. But you make the decision not knowing the outcome until after you've rolled the die. So this leads to one of the first of many interesting goals in game design is how can we create interesting decisions for our players? This is not an interesting decision from our perspective because frequently as the designer, we understand everything underneath the hood. We wrote all of the systems. So it's not an interesting decision to us. But being able to put yourself in the shoes of your player and say, if I didn't know any of the underlying systems here, what are the options that I have? How would I anticipate thinking about the choices that I have? You'll find yourself very frequently putting yourself in the shoes of someone who knows less about the game than yourself. Let's take a look at Tracy Fullerton's definition. A closed formal system that engages players in structured conflict and resolves its uncertainty in an unequal outcome. You can tell she's an academic just by the definition. Break it down a bit. This is a kind of a mouthful. So formal elements. This is what helps us to be able to determine what a game is compared to some other media that is not a game. So a game has rules, whereas a movie does not. A game has procedures by which to follow, whereas some other kind of media does not have exactly that same set of procedures. The actual methods by which, when it is your turn and you have done this, then you can do this or this. It's not necessarily stated in the rules, but it is part of the state space of the game. It doesn't have to be stated, you just can't do something else. So that would be a procedure. Draw a card might be a procedure. Players, resources, objectives, boundaries, conflict, and outcome. All of these are formal elements, and we will dive into a lot of these in a bit more detail to really break them down to see how we can utilize them when creating a game. There are dynamic systems. This is how you interact with other players or the game itself. If it's a player versus environment type of game, as the game is played, this becomes more and more evident. You start to learn more about the dynamic systems, not because you read it in a rule book, but because you engaged with it in some capacity. We have a conflict structure. How are players going to engage with each other, interact with each other? We have some uncertainty. How is randomness being utilized? How is determinism being utilized? What is the emergent strategy from the concept of that randomness and determinism? As a designer, you have complete and total control over what is random, all of the associated probabilities, what is deterministic, what is going to guarantee to happen after something. You have to throw all of this together in a way that promotes different strategies, different successful strategies. If there's a single right way to play, the game is boring. We have an unequal outcome, which just says we want the game to be able to end in different ways. Players need to either be able to win or lose or something else. Examples of games where you don't win or lose.
Started Alley.
Yeah, that's a good example. I like to think about something like Dungeons and Dragons. You can have a tabletop game, and yes, it's possible for your entire party to be killed and lose that way, but there's not necessarily an end point to a campaign unless the players all agree, all right, we're kind of bored of this, time to move on. But the game can continue playing forever as long as there is interest in doing so. But that's part of the design of the game. It's a very important consideration as part of it. So only way to get better at thinking about games is to make games. Not really to talk about making games, but to actually go do it. Learn it by doing. We'll be doing a lot of that this quarter. It's okay to design a terrible game. It's a learning process. I really wanted there to be the ability to do 3 games. That's what I've historically done. But in this second quarter, I think it makes more sense to do 2 than 3. Means a little bit less iteration, but it is perfectly okay if you're not happy with the end result. You're going to learn a lot from that process. Jesse Schnell's definition. Problem-solving activity approached with a playful attitude. Let's take a philosophical exercise for a moment here at the reasonably end of class. Imagine you and someone else are engaged in the same activity. Example, a foot race. Your partner is in it solely to take part in the race. Have a good time. You know there is a bomb at the finish line that must be defused before it goes off. So, first and foremost, who is most likely to adhere to the rules of the activity? Yeah, right? You, knowing life and death is on the line, are probably going to throw rules out the window and do whatever you need to survive. There's a bomb at the finish line. And this leads us to this concept of a term that we're going to call illusory attitude. And this just states your willingness to follow the game's rules. There may be an easier way to achieve the stated goal of the game. What's an example of a game that you could, by ignoring the rules, get to a winning state faster?
One, use an action replay.
Sure. Cheating.
Any game that like has some kind of loot system where somebody figures out like a way to circumvent that to get loot faster.
My example is golf. There are a significant number of easier ways to get a small ball in a slightly larger hole than standing hundreds of yards away from it and hitting it with a stick. But we've prescribed some rules to golf to make it more interesting than someone walking up and placing the golf ball in the hole and saying, "Oh, I got a hole in one. How unexpected was that?"
We'll be honest, hitting it with your foot isn't much better.
Spoken from experience, it sounds like.
But golf is not as fun as you would imagine. It's not for me. That's soccer.
So one aspect, a way to think about games is that you're setting up challenges, something that's in the way of that goal, completely unnecessarily, solely so that someone can enjoy overcoming that obstacle that you placed in their way. So how can you intelligently place those obstacles so that it is fun to overcome them? Keith Bergen's definition: system of rules in which agents compete by making ambiguous, endogenously meaningful decisions. Ambiguous here just means that a player is making a choice without necessarily having a full knowledge of the outcome of that decision. What is the game going to do about this decision that I've made? It's fun to have a little bit of uncertainty in that. And endogenously meaningful, just choice being meaningful has a noticeable effect on the system itself. You don't want to make a painstaking decision just to realize it has no effect whatsoever on the actual game. I like to think about this in a story-driven, choice-driven RPG. Anyone have the experience of you click on some text, your character says that, and then just whatever follows from other characters makes no sense based on what you said, or you click to express a certain type of attitude, and what your character says is completely different from what you anticipated or what you expected them to say based on that prompt. So we see this, right? We want the choice to be meaningful because we know what it's going to do to the system. We know how our choices are going to affect the system. And it's also meaningful. Why have a dialogue option if they both lead to the same end result? If you're going to give the player a choice, make that choice meaningful where they feel like, I picked this, I'm putting myself in that character's shoes, I want this character to feel this, to experience this. I don't want bad things to happen. I want bad things to happen. Any way that the player might want to respond to that situation, make sure that your choices are leading to something that is interesting and meaningful. Real quickly, we can talk about games mean different things to different people. Of course, this is true, but there are lots of different kinds of games. There are video games, board games, card games, word games, tabletop games. Lots of different kinds of games that are all engaged and involved in this same system. But there are also many different reasons to play games, and we're going to dive into that at the start of tomorrow's class. But start thinking about maybe over the next 23 hours, why is it that you play games? What are you trying to get out of games? And how does that differ from people you have met who also play games? We'll dive into that discussion starting tomorrow.